It was an incredible, exciting moment in our life. And it was a moment where we felt that we were doing history.
All around the world, 1968 would be remembered as a year of civil unrest and challenge to existing cultural and political institutions. In France, the events in May of that year best represent the social upheaval. The country would experience widespread turmoil, violence, and protests. These events would become known collectively as May 68. The events would begin in Paris with students at the Sorbonne University, but quickly spread to the rest of the country. Labor unions and workers would soon join in a general strike and bring the entire French economy to a halt. While it failed to achieve many of its goals, the movement would give way to the next wave of the women's liberation movement and environmental movement in France, with a similar trend seen in other Western nations. Ultimately, May 68 signified a turning point in France for the questioning of social norms, culture, and political institutions, especially for women. After World War II, France saw an economic boom known as the 30 Glorious Years. However, underlying this prosperity was deep social animosity and division. France was losing its grip on its colonies in Asia and Africa. In 1954, it withdrew forces from Indochina after conflict in Vietnam. In 1962, the Algerian War ended with Algerian independence. As a result of colonial rule, many Indochinese and North African immigrants would come to France. They would fill a gap in manual labor created by the expansion of higher education, during which universities would see enrollment triple. However, students were dissatisfied with what they viewed as outdated university rules and standards.
University student building, student home. If you were caught as a man in a woman's building or the woman in a man's building after 9 o'clock in the evening, after 3 times, you could be expelled from the university.
Many immigrants would settle in the Latin Quarter of Paris and become involved in May 68 due to the poor living and working conditions. During the Algerian War, General Charles de Gaulle, a veteran of the Second World War, took power. Under de Gaulle, the government held considerable power in the press, as it had a monopoly over radio and television broadcasting. The government represented conservative social norms, with women in particular being more restricted than in other European nations.
In France, 65, a married woman who wants to open a bank account or take a job need a written permission from her husband.
Coming out of World War II, the Communist Party and labor unions held considerable political power due to their prominent role in resisting the Nazi occupation. Despite the post-war economic boom, many workers did not experience this prosperity. University students, immigrants, women, and workers were united through their opposition to de Gaulle. The participants of the May events were extremely diverse in background and ideology. However, all sought to challenge the conservative social norms of France. The March 22nd movement began with students demanding university reform at the University of Nanterre. May 5th marked a shift in these protests.
This was the March 22nd movement, famously led by Daniel Cohn-Bendit. He was the leader right from the start.
Increased conflict between students and police prompted more students and teachers to become involved. Everything came to a head on the night of May 10th. This night would become known as the Night of the Barricades.
Ongelooflijk hard werd opgetreden met die waterkanonnen door de politie, met al dat traangas waar ze granaten van schoten en zo. En waarbij de studenten vervolgens in reactie, ook om zich te beschermen, barricades in de straten opwierpen. Er werden daar binnen de kortste keren, ik geloof iets van 19 of 20 barricades in het Quartier Latin opgebouwd.
Thousands of people were injured. And that then provoked a reaction from the society. The population was outraged, and the unions picked up this outrage, and since they had had a lot of trouble too with the police, but not much success in fighting with them, the workers seized their factories. And within a few days, the entire economy of France was blocked.
At its height, May 68 would see 10 million workers on strike. The protesters' demands were as widespread and diverse as they were. They wanted education reform at the universities, increased wages and labor protections, and personal liberation, particularly for women. Despite 2/3 of the French workforce being on strike, the Communist Party was hesitant to throw its full support behind the movement. The influential General Confederation of Labor, or CGT, was closely associated with the Communist Party. Both the CGT and the Communist Party attempted to narrow the focus of the workers to solely economic demands. However, workers would reject negotiations with employers and the strike would persist. On May 31st, President de Gaulle announced the parliamentary elections for late June. This, combined with the lack of central organization, caused the movement to dissipate by early June. De Gaulle and the Conservatives would go on to dominate the elections, marking the end of May 68. But what is May 68's legacy, and how does it mark a turning point in France?
This picture is in a collective memory. It's not me. It is the memory of a generation who said, against power, you can fight with irony, you can fight, and you can really make the difference with it.
Ultimately, the events of May 68, more than anything, symbolized what was possible. By displaying the power of young people and the marginalized, the events represent a turning point for social movements. The end of 68 was not the end, but rather the beginning. With the beginning of the decline of the Communist Party, 68 marked a shift in what movements were centered around. With the growth of new social movements, inevitably came the decline of the old. Instead of class struggle, more and more movements were focused on the individual identities of those marginalized.
The political culture of the United States today is completely derivative of this period in the New Left, when both the communist movement was destroyed by the consensus, and then the consensus was destroyed by the New Left, and that created openings for all the other movements that have feminism, ecology, all the social movements that have since evolved.
In the minds of many, new possibilities were created for what political and cultural institutions could be challenged. In France, May 68 represents the turning point of social norms, shifting from the pre-World War II generation to the post-war generation. The resignation of President de Gaulle a year after the May events is evidence of France's shifting social climate thanks to 68. With this shift came greater roles and rights for women, young people, and other marginalized groups.
Tout n'était certainement pas bien, mais beaucoup de choses ont été naturellement acceptées par la société, sans même se rendre compte que c'est né en 68. La fin de l'homophobie, les nouvelles libertés accordées aux femmes, etc.
May 68's power lies in the imagination. By questioning what was possible, it asserted that anything was possible.
Même si le mois de mai ne vous a guère touché, même s'il n'y a pas eu de manif dans votre rue, même si votre voiture n'a pas été incendiée, même si vous vous en foutez, chacun de vous est concerné. Même si vous croyez maintenant que tout est bien comme avant, parce que vous avez voté l'ordre et la sécurité, même si vous ne voulez pas que bientôt on remette ça, même si vous vous en foutez, chacun de vous est concerné.